Kendall Coffee is a former federal prosecutor and titan here in South Florida legal circles. He also worked with Supreme Court nominee Brettta Kavano on one of the most infamous cases in South Florida legal history. Joining me now to discuss the one and only Kendalll Coffee. Kendalll, always good to see you.
Thanks so much for having me here. Great to see you.
Okay, so let's talk about the Supreme Court nominee, because I know you've worked on some cases with him and against him on the opposing side. So let's talk about him first of all. What kind of person is he? What kind of character does he have?
Well, he's a super nice guy. He's kind, he's thoughtful, he's gracious. All the things that are being said. Scary, smart, no question, and a fabulous colleague. So anybody who's going to work with him is going to say nothing but very, very positive things. And I was grateful to have his help, because we were at a very difficult time in the representation of Elian Gonzalez and the family here. And he volunteered his services, along with some of his other colleagues, to try to help us position the case so that we could at least try to get the Supreme Court to look at the Elian Gonzalez case and give us a chance at Supreme Court consideration.
Before we talk about some of those cases, I want to know, what kind of relationship do you have with him today?
Well, I haven't spoken to him in years. We obviously got along well at the time and communicated. Again, super gracious guy. But I wish I could tell you I taught him everything I know. It's not true. On the other hand, I knew there was something special about him. And while you never know which paths and which way they lead, I had the feeling it wasn't the last time I had heard the name Bretta Kavano.
Well, he is a conservative. Do you think that he could be impartial in a court of law?
Well, I think he's utterly fair, but there's no question he has a conservative philosophy, and that philosophy is going to affect his decisions. And I think most of us looking objectively at this have a lot of respect for him as a person and as a jurist, but need to recognize that the court's going to move further to the right with Justice Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. It's already a conservative court. Justice Kennedy, who's being replaced, is by no means a liberal or even a centrist. He, for example, voted against President Obama's Obamacare. Justice Kennedy authored Citizens United, the case about campaign finance laws, which is widely and universally criticized by Democrats. That being said, Justice Kavanaugh on some critical areas is going to be more conservative than Justice Kennedy was, and that is going to be a central issue in his confirmation hearings.
Justice Kennedy many times was the swing vote. Who would take that role now? Do you think it could be Roberts?
I think you're exactly right, Jackie. I think Chief Justice Roberts is also deeply conservative, but is going to, from time to time, make a decision that centers the court and perhaps aligns it a little bit more with public opinion. The most striking example of that is, of course, the Obamacare, where Justice Kennedy joined the conservative dissent, but it was Chief Justice Roberts that essentially saved Obamacare with his fifth vote. And I think that there will be a lot of eyes on Chief Justice Roberts as the court moves down the road, including, of course, the constant question about what is the future of Roe versus Wade.
Would you see him more similar to a Scalia or a Thomas?
Well, I think that with respect to a Justice Kavanaugh, he has said that he supports very much the philosophy of Justice Scalia. I think on some things, though, for example, the due process rights of criminal defendants, Scalia was surprisingly positive about certain of those due process rights. And it may be that in the area of the rights of criminal defendants that the court becomes more conservative, with Kennedy leaving, with Scalia having died, and with the Justice Brettta Kavanaugh.
Thousands of pages have been given to the Senate Judiciary Committee. What will they be looking at?
They're going to focus on his role in the Starr investigation of President Clinton.
Very politically charged.
Very intense. His subsequent writings, where he basically, in so many words, said that the Starr investigation and the impeachment of President Clinton was a mistake, and how, if at all, that could affect him as a Supreme Court justice if the Mueller investigation at some point begins to target President Trump.
Now, in terms of Kenneth Starr, would that be subjective, that some people said that perhaps it shouldn't have gone in that direction?
Well, I think Justice Kavanaugh, or I don't mean Justice, Judge Kavanaugh, has said pretty clearly that he thinks that presidents should not be tied up with civil lawsuits, that a sitting president of the United States should not be dealing with a criminal investigation. And those were exactly the things that President Clinton was subjected to, and which now is being explored in terms of possibilities with respect to President Trump. Brett Kavanaugh was one of the lead prosecutors working under Kenneth Starr, and he had a very important role in the investigation of President Clinton. But years later, he concluded that perhaps we should rethink this because it's harmful to the country to have a president of the United States tied up with civil lawsuits, possible criminal cases, when presidents of the United States every single day, every single hour are facing the most difficult, momentous decisions that confront anybody in the world.
Absolutely. You say momentous decisions. That leads us back to Roe versus Wade. Democrats are saying that this is critical in terms of him being appointed. Do you think that that could be reversed?
I don't think anybody knows. And I think that there's no question that if Brett Kavanaugh were deciding Roe versus Wade today on a blank sheet of paper, he would not support it. But I'd also suggest that Justice Kennedy wasn't a giant Roe versus Wade fan. What he concluded, and part of his legacy, was he remained a solid fifth vote for keeping Roe versus Wade in place, was that it is part of the country's jurisprudence, it's part of our judicial laws, and it's one thing whether it was a good idea in the first place, which Justice Kennedy would probably say it wasn't, and which I think Brett Kavanaugh would say it wasn't. It's another thing to whether you so dramatically revise the foundation of American law with something, frankly, as momentous as considering the reversal of Roe versus Wade.
Do you see that happening?
I think it's probably not going to happen. And you know, none of us have been able to make predictions in the last couple of years about elections or about anything else. So I'm reluctant to try to make a prediction here. But I look at a Chief Justice John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh, who have very strong ideas about the importance of the court's work and also the credibility that the court has, its impact as a moral leader, and what does it do to the position of the court if something so intensely charged, so politically charged, strong feelings, if they leave it alone or if they get in and turn everything upside down.
Okay, let's talk about two cases that you also, both of you worked together and were on opposing sides. And one of them, of course, was the Elian Gonzalez saga. You mentioned that earlier. In that particular case, you were on the same side.
We're on the same side.
And you took it all the way to the Supreme Court.
All the way, and I believe, and he came forward free of charge, his time donated, and I think he was sympathetic to our issues. But one of the things that could affect his future as a Supreme Court justice is his strong interest in one of the key issues of the Elian Gonzalez case. And your viewers, Jackie, may think of it as a case that was about the rights of a father and the oppressive regime of Castro. But in legal terms, it was about the power of a federal agency. And that issue is getting a lot of attention right now. Do federal agencies have too much power? And the issue in that case was if you've got a law that says any alien may apply for asylum, it seems to include any being a 6-year-old boy. And that was, of course, the heart of our legal argument. What immigration concluded was that any, in that case, didn't mean any, and the courts then and now give a huge amount of legal decision-making power to federal agencies. Because of that power, the immigration agency's decision that Elian should go back was accepted by the court. And I believe that if he's on the Supreme Court, that same issue will be very important to Justice Kavanaugh in a different context. Are the courts giving too much latitude and power to federal agencies and all the things they do, and whether federal agencies, rather than judges, decide very important legal questions.
Is it difficult when you work with someone and then you're on the opposing side, like in the case of Bush v. Gore? In that case, you were on opposing sides.
We're on opposing sides, and I have to say, it's always better to be on the same side of somebody with his talent and personal qualities. But the Republican strategy, looking back, was brilliant. I have to look back at it and say they fought hard, they fought honorably, they fought brilliantly, and they won. I will forever be very disappointed in the outcome of that case. As you know, I represented Vice President Gore and Senator Lieberman. That case had very, very dramatic consequences for our country, but the Republican lawyers from top to bottom, including Brettta Kavano, did a superb job.
So in that particular case, even though your side lost, you think that on the case merit that he did a good job in terms of the case?
They did a great job, and they truly understood the United States Supreme Court. They truly saw that that was where the case was going to end up. We viewed it as more of a Supreme Court of Florida case, and they created a strategy to get 5 votes in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, and ultimately it prevailed.
Does it worry you at all, any concerns that Judge Kavanaugh has written that the President of the United States should not deal with court proceeding while holding the office?
Well, I think it's a very fair question, because he's put those views in writing. Those views strongly suggest that there should be no investigation involving President Donald Trump. That issue is perhaps the largest issue in American life right now, and it's a very fair source of questioning. Could somebody on the Supreme Court who's already staked out a position in writing saying that, in effect, presidents can't be investigated, is that somebody that should get some tough questions and have to answer the questions? We're going to see that within the coming weeks.
Do you think the president would invoke executive privilege?
I think the president will assuredly invoke executive privilege. I think unless he gets, as he's been trying to negotiate, a limited interview on limited subjects on his terms, they're not going to agree to an interview. That's going to prompt a grand jury subpoena. That's going to prompt a fight over executive privilege. And that could very well end up in front of the United States Supreme Court.
What do you think in the history right now of Judge Kavanaugh, what could tilt it in his direction or against him right now as it stands?
In terms of getting confirmed?
Yes.
I think he will get confirmed for sure if he makes some statement indicating that he's open to recusing himself on cases involving President Trump. If he holds out an insistence that he be able to participate in those decisions, then I think that could make his confirmation more difficult. He may get confirmed no matter what. There's more Republican senators than Democrats. But I think that's going to be a pivotal issue, and the questions are very fair. Questions about Roe versus Wade, he's going to deflect. They all deflected. Democratic appointees, Republican appointees, they say they're not going to comment on how they vote on the pending cases. But I think the questions about his participation in the Clinton investigation, his views on that could apply to the potential Trump investigation, those are fair game.
So I ask you now, because you are familiar with the judge, you've worked with him and you worked against him, would you endorse a Supreme Court Judge Kavanaugh?
Well, I would say that if it were within my power to name somebody to the United States Supreme Court, I would not name him. Nothing to do with his tremendous personal qualities, his legal abilities. He's got 5 times the resume I'll ever have. But philosophically, it represents a very different view from what many of us embrace. And as the Senate's voice has evolved, senators in modern times can consider whether they think the legal philosophy of a nominee is simply too far from something that they think is acceptable. He's very conservative. John Roberts got confirmed. Obviously, Alito got confirmed. Gorsuch got confirmed. So the fact that someone has deeply conservative principles is not a disqualification. But I certainly liked President Obama's naming of Merrick Garland, and I think when Republicans...
Because of the delay?
But, you know, the way the system works is President Trump ran and said he was going to appoint very, very conservative justices. And that's exactly what he's been doing.
Do Democrats have a leg to stand on because of what happened with Garland?
That's going to be the argument. I don't think that's going to push any votes in their favor.
Kendall Coffee, as always, so good to see you. Love your
Jackie.
insight.
Well, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. And still to come here, the GOP.